What's good, y'all? I hope you guys are having a great day. In today's video, I just wanted to announce that I'm giving out a 30% off discount code for my new Mastering Chess Endgames course, which is over 28 hours in length, meant to get you from knowing nothing about chess endgames into the top 1% of endgame players. We start out with the basics and we build into very complicated topics and subjects, really meant to help you master the endgame, master that theoretical side, walk away with some practical things and ideas that you can utilize as well. And again, for those of you that get it, I really hope that you guys enjoy the course. If you're interested in that 30% off discount code, go down to the link below, either in the pinned comment or the description, plug in the discount code CHESS25 and you will receive 30% off on your purchase. This discount code is good for the rest of my courses on Gumroad as well. Only good through the month of September. And in this video, I wanted to give you guys a quick little sneak peek into the course. So I put together 50 levels. Here, I'm going to be showing you level 26, which talks about the frontal defense technique in Rook endgames. Hope you enjoy. And again, to get 30% off, plug in the discount code CHESS25. I'll see you on the next video. Hope you enjoy this little segment. We're now going to be taking a look at some positions in which case our king is cut off by the rook from getting in front of the pawn. So this position here, we would love to get in front of this pawn. We would with our king. However, the rook is blocking our king off. Now, when it comes to a sideline pawn, you barely even need to worry about where the opponent's king is. For example, let's say a5 is played, we can just play the move rook to b8. Now, if you stay there, we're going to take you on b1. If you capture us, we take back. This is a sideline pawn. It's a sideline pawn. So we just go back and forth. We have a draw. And if rook to c1 will check, we could play king to b7, king a7. And honestly, at this point, I might just go with the passive back rank defense technique, putting my king in the corner, rook to g8, and we're just going to be going back and forth there. So no way for white to win that game. Here in this position, it's white's move, and this is a draw, surprisingly enough. Now, again, our king is cut off. Now, this isn't a sideline pawn. This pawn is on the b file. So when you're looking at pawns that get closer and closer into the center, you are more at risk of losing the game if you're the defensive side. If you're the one that's playing for the win, you don't want your pawn on the sideline. Now, if it's white's turn here, which we're assuming it is, there are some different things that we could see. But if you do see b5, just like last time, you can play rook to c8. You can play rook to c8. You love to get your king over here, but you can't because of the rook. So what are you going to do? Rook to c8. If white wants to check you or do whatever, okay, we'll run over. We're good. And if you do take on c8, our king captures back. This is a draw. This is a draw. The pawn is leading the way in front of the white king. We play king to b7. We're going to look to block the pawn, take opposition, all that kind of good stuff. Now, what else could we see from white? Let's say white makes a move like rook to c2 or something. They make a move and they're like, you know what? I want to stay on this file. I want to keep this king from getting in front of the pawn. Well, again, we can offer a trade. And the reason this works is because the white king is not in position to go for the winning square here, which would be the square of a5. If that king was on a4 already, we're not doing this, because the king would go to a5, we're dead lost. But in this case, if you go to a4 or c4, we have the key defensive move of king to b8, and no matter where you step with this king, making progress, we're able to match that by taking opposition. If you go to a5, we have a7. If you go to b5, we have b7, and we're looking towards a draw. If you run back with your king, what are you doing as white? I mean, that's not going to get you the win either. We've now blocked the pawn. We're going to go straight back, take opposition, all that kind of good stuff. So making a little waiting move here with the rook. This allows us to play rook to c8 because this white king is not in position to lead the pawn the right way. Now, what if the king does try to play the move king to a4? The frontal defense is all about checking the opponent's king. And when you have the opponent's pawn, the passed pawn on the b or g files, you can really check that king. You can check and check and check and check because there's nowhere for the king to hide. The only place the king can hide is behind the pawn. If they don't do that, they're going to get skewered or they're going to drop the pawn. There's no way around that. So, for example, here again, we're not doing rook to c8, because this king is in position, not to play king b5, which gives us a draw, but king a5. If we go to b8, white takes opposition. If we go to b7, white takes opposition. If we take opposition, who cares? We're not in front of the pawn. And yeah, I mean, white's just crushing this. So the whole idea of the frontal defense is that when this king comes out, you're going to start throwing in checks, right? You're throwing in a check on a8 here. And if you see the move of king to b5, you got to check again. You can't just make a little waiting move here. Okay, if you make a little waiting move, white has time to play rook to c4, defending their pawn on the same rank. We talked about that in the previous level. And if you go with something like king to d5, the rook can run off now. We could throw the king into check there, but king a6, rook a8, I mean, this king is making progress. The rook could even check us, and yeah, I mean, that pawn's going to make some good advancements. And returning to this spot after king to a6, if we try to get our king closer, that's not going to work either. White here could go with rook to h6 with check. White could even play b5 with check. And we can't even take that pawn back because of rook h6, and our rook is gonna fall off the board here. So if you do see, right, something like rook to c4 there, again, you're just dead lost. Even if you check and check, you're running out of moves here. White is able to push their pawn. Their king is going to lead their pawn to promotion. So again, in the frontal defense, you got to keep delivering checks, specifically when you have a pawn on the b file like this. Throw in a check. Hey, if white wants to make progress, thanks for the pawn. If you go to the c file, we as black are winning. If you go to a5, we check, and we check, and we check. We continue checking, always looking out for a hanging pawn there in case white gives us that. And if white ends up running all the way back to b3, all right, here we go. We're back to c8. We're back to c8. If you move somewhere else with your rook, our king is able to get in front of that pawn. We can use the passive back rank defense there because this is not a flank pawn or a central pawn. And if you do take our rook, your king is not in position to win this. There's only one move that draws for us. That's king to b8. If we do anything else, white takes opposition. Anything else, white takes opposition there. King to d8. You're way out of line now. King to b5, white's winning. But if king b8, the only way for white to keep opposition is to go to b4. But there's a pawn there. So no matter what they do here, we're totally fine. I mean, if they go to b5, b7, c5, c7, they went to d5, okay, we're going to b7 there, and we're shielding that king off from any further progress. So that gives us a really nice game. Now, again, with king a4, we got to put that king into check. We got to check that king. We cannot give white time to play the move of rook to c4. So some of you might be wondering, well, what if white just plays rook c4 before they move the king out? Well, this is where we got to be careful, because if we move our rook, for example, let's say we just play rook f8 or something, we're dead lost. King a4 is played, and now if we start throwing the king into check, the king is not afraid anymore. There's nothing to be worried about. b4 is protected, and yeah, I mean, we're just dead lost. And if we see king a4 and we just make some kind of waiting move here, like rook to g8, white is going to continue to make progress with their king anyways. And our king is simply blocked out. It's out of this game. And again, rook to c8 there doesn't work because after white captures off, their king is already in a great spot to jump to a5 and win the game out of that. So if you see this move of rook to c4, you could play rook a8. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. You're preventing the king from making any kind of progress. Of course, if you see the move of b5 here, there's different things that you could do. I would recommend rook c8. Just play rook c8, offer a trade there, capture back. That pawn is way in front of the white king in terms of them trying to win the game. So they're not going to be able to win that because the pawn is too far ahead. And if something like rook to c5, right, you could play rook c8. You can continue with that. Even if king c4 here, we're still able to take off that rook. I don't care if we're taking with the pawn or the king. In either case, we have a draw. But nonetheless, if white does try to play rook to c4, again, we got to play with a sense of urgency here. Okay. Now, there's different things that you could do here, but I personally would recommend rook to c8. Rook to c8, offer a trade of rooks, and if white takes, we can capture back. It turns out, in this kind of position, though, if your king is on d6, you have a draw. You have a draw here. So, for example, if this king ends up running, okay, what do we have here? Well, we're going to play king to d5, attacking the rook immediately. We don't want this rook defending the pawn. We don't want this rook blocking our king out. So that technically works. And yeah, I mean, if something like rook to c5, king d6, yet again, the pawn is not protected. So if the king does try to make advancements, you can't. You got to babysit your pawn. If the rook decides to go back to c4, okay, king d5, and we have a draw. But again, I think rook to c8 there, going back to the original spot where white plays rook to c4, I think rook to c8 there is easy. And of course, if you see king a4, rook to c8 doesn't work, you got to throw in a check here. Check, 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 because you got to be worried about king a5 after white ends up trading off the rooks there. I know that I might be sounding a little bit repetitive. I'm just trying to get these ideas down because these are very complicated ideas here that we're talking about. I think that repetition is the key to all mastery, so that's why I'm going through these ideas again and again and again. Now, taking a look at our next position here, we have a flank pawn. We have a pawn on c4. It's not on b4. What this means is that this king has more room to work with, right? When you're looking at a b pawn, the king just can't waddle back and forth and chase the rook because it's going to get skewered at some point without their rook defending their pawn. In this case, you got two files that you can work with as a white king without worrying about your pawn on c4. We got to be very careful here. It turns out, with it being white's move, if our king is on e6, we have a draw. But if our king was on e7 and it's white's move, white's winning. Let's take a look at how we draw this position with the help of our king on e6. So, first things first, if c5, okay, honestly, guys, I recommend king e7. King e7, play rook to d8. You're fine here. If white takes, their pawn is in front of their king. That's not good for them. It's not good at all. If this pawn was on c4, white would have a win with king to b5. But the pawn's on c5, so if you do play king b5, or really whatever you play, we can block the pawn with king to c7, and we have a draw there. So again, if you want to advance the pawn, we can drop our king back, bring the rook over. Okay, that's a common idea that we can use again and again. Now let's say the king does try to make progress here. We throw in a check. Here's the difference. Here's the difference. If you play king a5, and we just go, you know what, we're going to start checking your king. Well, white's making progress. They can work with two files now, not just one, right? Not just one little sideline, but they have two complete files now. They don't need to step to the c file necessarily. And honestly, at this point, if we throw them into check again, this time they could because there is no skewer. So in this kind of spot where you have a central pawn or a flank pawn and you're using the frontal defense, you check the king. The moment the king isn't defending the pawn anymore, you got to play rook to c8. Play rook c8. And if the king decides to defend the pawn, okay, check. The second it lets go of the pawn, okay, I'm back to attacking the pawn. If you defend it with the rook, this is why this matters. We have king to e5 attacking the white rook there. Now, if something like rook to h4, let's bring our king in a little bit closer. This is what we want. You cut off our king, it's not cut off anymore. We're able to look at c5. We're able to look at c6 and c7. We're looking at the c file now, and if white tries to slow all of that down, rook to b8. Rook to b8. Getting the white king out of there, making progress, right? King c6, king c5. Both of those are a draw, right? Either one of those. And even, I mean, there's a lot of draws here, but I would probably personally play either king c5 or king c6, threatening checkmate. Would white see it? Probably, but you never know. Okay. With king e5, let's say white throws in a check. Okay, we don't want to play king to e4 because we're trying to get in front of this pawn. We're not trying to get past it, right? Let's play king to e6. We want to be within range to get in front of that pawn, not be chasing it from behind. We gotta keep our king in this game defensively. Let's say we see something like king to b4, defending the pawn. Well, we're going to throw in a check. If you bring the rook back, we just attack the rook again. We go back and forth. If you push the pawn, you lose as white. So you got to bring the king back to b4 or b5 and try to defend that pawn somehow, but we throw in a check. And if rook b5 here, we're not taking that because king takes b5 or c takes b5. Either one's actually winning for white. And this king is leading their pawn. That's not what we want. So with rook b5, okay, rook c8. Keep an eye on that pawn. Keep an eye on it. C5 lets our king in. That helps our king make progress. Rook D5. All right, we throw in a check. Okay, we throw in a check. And there's different things that you could do here. Basically, what you need to do is you need to be prepared for C5. You need to have some kind of answer ready. That's what I would recommend here. So you could play rook to A8. That's totally fine. If you see C5, you're actually winning that position. You could play rook to C7 and just keep your eye on that guy. And if you see the move of C5, you have rook D7 ready to go. This is a draw. So as we know, with the frontal defense technique, if the opponent's king has two open files that they can work with without having to worry about the pawn behind them, we're not going to check and check that king. The king is going to make progress. The whole reason we were able to check and check and check the king when the pawn was on the b file is because the king couldn't make progress without dropping their pawn. Again, right, in this position here, if you see king to a5, we're not checking that king, we're going right back. Now, let's say we see king c5, okay, rook to c8, that's fine. You can't make progress because you would drop your pawn. If you go to d4, white actually loses this. If you go to b5, okay, check, that's fine. Now, if king c6, yeah, we'll check again. You got to go back. I mean, I guess you could make progress, quote unquote, but you'd obviously just drop your pawn. And if you do go back, okay, check, we're in the same position as before. Let's say white tries king a6. Again, we're going back to c8. We're not checking that king. We're going to rook c8, attacking the pawn. You want to go to b5, check again. Rook to d4. This is why it's so important our king is on e6 so that we can attack this rook. This rook was cutting off our king. This rook is looking to defend the pawn. Now the rook has to make a choice. Am I going to save the pawn, or am I going to let the opponent's king back into this? Now, if you see something like rook h4, oh, our king's let back in, right? King to d6. And, I mean, king b6 there, we throw in a check. The king's got to run. There's different things you could do here. I would probably just play rook to b1. Now their king is cut off from helping that pawn promote. And your king is looking towards c6. It's looking towards c5. You're in a great spot here. If rook d5 with check, king back to e6. And we know what we're doing here. We're checking the king. King a6. Are we checking there? No, because there's not a pawn behind it. White is able to make progress. That's the key point there, right? White's able to make progress in that kind of position. So we're not going to check on a8. White makes progress. Now our rook has to like go to a4 or something. But white could continue with rook to d4 defending the pawn. Sure, we could attack the rook, but then rook h4. And this is a totally different situation because our rook's on a4, very awkward. I mean, we don't want to let their king get to c6. We don't want their king leading their pawn. So if we check, that's what's going to happen. If we play king to d6 here so that they can't put the king in front of their pawn, white has one move. White has one move to win. c5 with check. Sad ending there. So with king a6 again. Second that king's off. Okay, we're attacking the pawn again. We're attacking the pawn. And yeah, I mean, king b5, check again. King a4. Let's attack the pawn again. King b4. By the way, with the king on a4, you could check there, but I just like the rule of, okay, the king has two open files or more. Okay, we're looking back at the pawn. We throw in a check. King c3. Different things that you could do here, including looking at the pawn. King to d4. We could play rook to c7. We could do that, right? Rook to c7. The whole point here is that we are ready against the move of c5 to play the rook over. And, I mean, if you throw in a check, we're going to be looking towards insufficient material. If you do capture our rook, we're looking at a drawn game here. And if we see the move of rook a5, okay, our king is back in the game. Our king is no longer cut off. White there just can't make progress. And you don't have to play rook to c7. Okay, you don't have to do that, right? I mean, rook a8. Very aggressive type of move. Aggressive in the sense that, hey, if white decides to push, we're winning. So it just depends on what kind of style you want to go with. Do you just want to keep your rook looking at their c4 pawn, or do you want to kind of just run away for a second and see if they're going to push it, giving you the win? Okay, in that kind of position, that is totally doable. Next up, we're looking at a position in which case everything's the same, but our king is not on e6. It's on e7. We're now just dead lost. We're dead lost. Now, if white makes the mistake of c5, which I could see a lot of players doing this, we have rook to d8. Rook to d8. Are you going to let our king in front of your pawn? Or are you going to take and end up in a position in which case the white pawn is way in front of the white king, which is not good for our opponent. c5 there, big mistake. White here really does need to play the move of king to b4. Now, we don't want to just sit around and let them make progress. Rook to d8 doesn't work because white takes, and then white plays king to b5, and they're crushing that position. And we could throw in a check, and if we see king a5, look, we could throw in a check, right? We could keep throwing in checks, but then white's king makes progress. If we play rook to c8, the rook defends the pawn. Our king would love to go to e5, but it's out of position. King to e6, this gives white time to attack our rook. If we decide to run away somewhere, let's say g8 or something, c5, that pawn is coming down in a hurry. And if we put the rook on c5, king b6, and the pawn's pushing anyways. If we go back with rook to c8, if we do this whole idea of checking the king and then looking at the pawn again, and white defends it on the same rank with their rook, okay, again, they're not wanting to do this because then our king gets into the defense. They got to defend it on the same rank so that our king is still cut off and so that the pawn is still defended. We would love to get our king to e5, but we can't. Can't do it. King e6 here. I mean, king to b6. Again, throwing in a check here just doesn't get it done. White makes progress. Their king's leading the pawn now. If rook to b4, white could throw in a check, advance their pawn. If we now play king to e5, rook h4, and this is really how much one little move, I'm saying little in quotes, right? Because in the game of chess, every move matters. But one move can make the difference between a loss or a draw. Here, I mean, we got to get our king to the action. That pawn's looking to roll. It's looking to roll down. If we bring the king in and white makes some kind of quiet move here, like rook to g4, we throw in a check, we're good. But because our king was late getting to e5, white has time to play multiple moves. I mean, rook h6 with check is a good option there, followed by looking towards something like c5. We could also see c5 check right now. If we take that guy, rook h6 check. And we can either let go of the rook right now or defend it, but we're going to lose it anyways. So that's not great. And now for our final position, we're going up against a pawn in the center. Again, our king is cut off. Our king is cut off there. If our king right now was on d6, this is an easy draw. Easy draw there. A lot of techniques that you could go with, including the Philidor's defense technique. Okay, that's something that we could look at. But right now, our king is cut off from that pawn. We got to be careful. Now, if the pawn pushes, again, I really like the idea of bringing the king back and then just dropping the rook on e8. Either the rook has to let you back in, or if they take, because this pawn is in front of the white king, that king can't lead it. King to d7, we just block the pawn, and we're looking towards a draw. So d5 there doesn't work for white. Let's say rook e5. Different things that you could do, including rook to c8, just, I mean, looking at c4 and c3. Let's say the king tries to go the other way. Look, rook to d8 is playable, right? You could play the move of rook to d8 there. You could also go with that rook a8 idea. Whole point being, if they push the pawn, we win. If we see rook to c5 or something, well, you just let our king back in. We're good. So white is unable to make progress there. Even if you lift up to e5, and let's say we see king to c4, okay, let's check. Does the king here have more than one file available? Do they have two or more files available to use their king without having to worry about a pawn behind them? Yeah? Okay, we're not going to keep checking that king. We're going right back to that pawn. Right back to it. If the rook defends, king f5. If king c5, check. Check. Because of the fact that we're looking at that pawn. White comes back to defend it. Okay, check. Oh, you let go of the pawn? Okay, we're targeting it again. Rook e4. Okay, now we'll attack your rook. Rook h4. The king gets back into the game here. And, yeah, I mean, same ideas as before. We're looking at d5 with our king. You see king c6. You see king c5. We're able to drop a check. Let's say you see king to c7. Different things that you could do in that kind of position. I mean, you could throw in a check on d7. Nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. But yeah, we're looking at a draw here. There's no way for white to convert this into a win. So the frontal defense idea, very advanced, but just remember, okay, when you're using this, you really have to keep your eye on how many open files the opponent's king has to work with. Okay, now if the king can't make progress without dropping the pawn, by all means, check, 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 check. But if the king is able to make progress without worrying about the pawn behind them, you got to redirect your focus to the pawn. And the second the rook guards it from the same rank, you got to have your king in position to attack that rook and give that rook a choice. Do you want to let my king back in, or do you want to drop the pawn? I wanted to finish this video out by giving a big thanks to Walter, Steve, Rob, that's a lot of Robs, Ray, Roger, and the rest of my Patreon community. I appreciate you guys a ton. If you guys haven't checked out the Patreon before, there are some exclusive benefits that you gain by becoming a member, and I look forward to seeing y'all in the next video. Peace.